Hey, I'm Ben Shapiro with Reality Check. A couple of weeks ago, HBO's Bill Maher got into it with the Islamic expert and horrifyingly mediocre actor who should never, ever, 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 ever play Batman, Ben Affleck, over whether Islam was indeed a violent religion. Here's the exchange.
And you painting the whole religion with that.
No, let's get down to who has the right answer here. 1 billion people, you say. All these billion people don't hold any of these...
1.5 or something.
Don't hold these pernicious beliefs?
No,
I wouldn't...
Well, they don't.
Of course, he's not alone in taking the PC position that Muslims the world over are tolerant and liberal. He's joined by our president, Barack Obama.
Islam teaches peace. Muslims the world over aspire to live with dignity and a sense of justice.
Wow, it's just like John Lennon's Imagine. Now, the question isn't whether Islam itself is violent. It's what its adherents believe, because that's what they act upon. There's plenty of violent material in the Old and New Testaments. Hey, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I read the Old Testament a lot. But believers in those particular texts are not currently ramming airliners into towers or beheading journalists or mutilating female genitalia. So, let's examine the question. Is radicalism in the Muslim world a tiny minority phenomenon? So to answer that question, we need to define our terms. We're really not talking about people who are active terrorists. Radical beliefs are a lot broader than terrorists, and anybody who argues otherwise is being naive or foolish or disingenuous. But terrorists draw their moral, financial, and religious support from those who are not terrorists themselves. So, who are the radicals? Ben Affleck actually was right on this. There are approximately 1.6 billion Muslims on the planet, and they're from 49 different countries in terms of where they have a majority. All the population stats, by the way, are from Pew Research as of 2011. Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim country. It's got almost 205 million Muslims living there. According to one 2009 poll, it showed almost 50% of Indonesians actually support strict Sharia law, not just in Indonesia, but in a lot of countries, and 70% blamed the United States, Israel, or somebody else for 9/11. So, you make that calculation, it's about 143 million people who are radicalized. You scared yet? We're just getting started. Okay, Egypt, 80 million Muslims. According to that same 2009 poll, it showed that 65% want strict Sharia law in every Islamic country, and almost 70% said that they had positive or mixed feelings about bin Laden. So that's 55.2 million more radicals. Pakistan has almost 179 million Muslims. 76%, just over three-quarters, want strict Sharia law in all Islamic countries. That is another 135.4 million radicals. Bangladesh, not a country you tend to think of as Muslim, but there are 149 million Muslims living there. As of 2013, just over a quarter said suicide bombings or targeting of civilians was sometimes justified. Another 82% want Sharia to be the official law of the country, and 2/3 said honor killings of women can sometimes be justified. Honor killings, 2/3. It's 121.9 million radicals. Nigeria, 75.7 million Muslims live there. 71% favor Sharia law. That's 53.7 million people. Iran, 74.8 million Muslims. 83% favor implementation of Sharia law as of last year. So that's 62.1 million more radicals. Turkey has 74.7 million Muslims. And 32%, this is a moderate Muslim country, probably the most moderate Muslim country, 32% said honor killings of women could actually be justified sometimes. So that's 23.9 million radical Muslims in our moderate ally, Turkey. Morocco, 32.4 million Muslims live there. Just over three-quarters support Sharia law. That's 24.6 million radical Muslims in Morocco. Iraq, 31.1 million Muslims live there. 78% say honor killings of women can sometimes be justified. That amounts to 24.3 million Muslim radicals. Afghanistan, 24 million people. A huge majority, 76%, support at least occasionally, or just once in a while, honor killings of women. 99% actually want Sharia to be the law of the land. So it's like a Cuban election over there. 24 million radical Muslims over in Afghanistan. Jordan, smaller Muslim country, 6.4 million Muslims. Right now, Hamas is enjoying like a 60% approval rating. So 3.8 million radical Muslims in Jordan, which is, again, a moderate country. Palestinian areas, right? We're sending literally hundreds of millions of dollars to the Palestinian areas. We are, the American taxpayers. 4.3 million Muslims live in the Palestinian areas. 78% of those had positive or mixed feelings about bin Laden. 89% support terror attacks on our ally, Israel. 89% support Sharia law. We should give them a state, folks. That's 3.83 million radical Muslims. How about in the West? Okay, let's take it to France. France, 4.7 million Muslims live there. A 2007 poll showed 35% of French Muslims said suicide bombings could sometimes be justified. It's 1.6 million radical Muslims living in France. Great Britain, 2.8 million Muslims living there. 78% wanted cartoonists of Muhammad legally prosecuted. So we're talking about 2.2 million radical Muslims in Great Britain. How about here in the United States? Well, we have a very moderate Muslim population. We do. 2.6 million Muslims live here, according to Pew Research. 13% said violence against civilians can be justified. 19% said they were either favorable toward al-Qaeda or just didn't know. Because who knows, really? That's almost 500,000 radical Muslims here in the United States. Here is the total of the countries that we've gone through just now. 680,030,000. 680,030,000 radical Muslims. And that's out of a total population in those countries of 942.4 million Muslims total. And it seems fair to assume that similar proportions of people in countries like Algeria, Syria, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Tunisia, Somalia, and Libya are also radicalized. And if they are, then, well, we're above 800 million Muslims who are radicalized. More than half the Muslims on earth. That's not a minority. That's now a majority. And that's still not even surveying hundreds of millions of Muslims in other countries. In other words, the myth of the tiny radical Muslim minority is just that. It's a myth. And, unfortunately, it's a myth that's going to get a lot of civilized people killed. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel or click here to give a quick donation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, especially because we are the last panel of the day and usually people leave, so I'm very happy to see that most of you are still here. Gives us hope. I wanted to show you this documentary because I wanted you to get an idea of how deeply embedded this radical ideology is today, at present, among believers. But when we speak of Islam and Muslims, there was a time when Muslims did not reject secularism. Theologically, the Quran, which is the holy book of Muslims, does not give the concept of a state. It speaks of moral and ethics. It's more concerned about polity than it is about law. We also have a precedent of the Prophet Muhammad, who had gone from Mecca to Medina. In Medina, he set up a constitution. Then when he came back and conquered Mecca, he had the opportunity to make that the state. That was the place that housed the Holy Kaaba, but he did not. He kept the constitution in Mecca. So in some of our understanding, that was a separation of mosque and state. And of course, he advised his followers to have the belief of follow the laws of the land where you live, unless you are forced to do something that is against the faith. And historically, under the Ottomans and in Spain, Islam did not reject secularism. And we know that Indian Muslims have also largely embraced secularism. But Orthodox and fundamentalist Muslims have always rejected secularism as being anti-Islam. Their only definition of secularism is that it is against religion, and in their case, especially against Islam. Maulana Maududi, the founder of the Jamaat-e-Islami, which is the Pakistani Muslim Brotherhood, said, and I quote, "Those who participate in secular politics are raising a flag of revolt against Allah, God, and His Messenger." And a lot of people follow that belief. Today, there is great tension within the Muslim world in terms of secularism, because as you saw, there are a large percentage of Muslims who have been convinced that the only way they can exist is under Islamic law, although there are only 4 Muslim countries that actually have Sharia law, which are Iran, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Sudan. But the rest of the Muslim world has at times followed secular law. In Pakistan, where I come from, they follow the British common law. Thank you for the remnant of that after colonization. They also do allow Sharia and tribal law. But I'll tell you how ironical it is that in Pakistan, for example, a Muslim couple may go to a civil court and get a divorce, and it is accepted, that divorce that is performed in the civil court is accepted in the religious courts. But right here in the United Kingdom in London, the civil court divorce is not accepted by the religious court. So the couple then has to go to the Sharia Council or the Sharia court, which your country has been so kind to offer 100 Sharia courts to the Muslims living here under the umbrella of multiculturalism, which then gives them an alternate. So, this goes back, of course, in time to where the lack of secularization began, where the rise of religious identity, the rise of religiosity began in the Muslim world. And it was in the late 1970s, while Ayatollah Khomeini was in exile in France. Instead of reading about French philosophers, he was studying the mandate of the Muslim Brotherhood. And at the same time, the oil embargo had allowed Saudi Arabia to flex its muscles. So what we see today, in essence, is the result of a 30-year turf war between Saudi Arabia and the Sunnis on one hand and Iran on the other hand for supremacy and hegemony over the Muslim world. Now, to achieve this, both parties have channeled billions of petrodollars into their ideology abroad because they are insistent that every Muslim needs to follow this certain boxed path that they have created. And what is this ideology? This ideology is definitely not secular. It stems from three major sources. It either stems from the Muslim Brotherhood, or it stems from the Wahhabi Salafi ideology, or Khomeiniism. And neither one of them supports any kind of separation of mosque and state. They want to promote Islam as the solution and wish to impose Sharia law on Muslims, not only those living in Muslim lands, but those now living in the West as well. So there have been many moves to impose a Sharia law. As a Canadian, I'm proud to tell you that about 7 years ago, when this proposition came up in Canada, the women's rights groups, the liberal groups, all together lobbied long and hard, and we actually got rid of that loophole within the Canadian law that allowed for arbitration. So we did not allow Sharia councils to exist, and that has been a great, great move in the right direction. So if we leave aside the Muslim world, where they have a choice to follow Sharia law or not, let's look at Muslims in the West. And I have to tell you that I am an eternal optimist, and I work as a Muslim reformist with my friend Majid Nawaz and the Quilliam Foundation. And we definitely believe that the reform can only come if there is separation of state and religion. And that is an essential component of any reform to take place, as you saw in the Christian world as well. I also believe that Muslims in the West might have adjusted to secularism had they not been given a choice to follow Islamic law. So why is it that they were given this on a platter? I know in the case of the United Kingdom, your Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, made a statement in which he felt that it was okay to allow minority communities, and minority communities under this umbrella of monoculturalism were looked upon as a monolith. They were not no individual thought was considered. This was a block, that Muslims are a block, they're all alike, so they should have Sharia law. And I believe in my readings in this fantastic book by a Yemeni-Swiss scholar, Dr. Elham Manea, has just published a book called Sharia and Women, which is very little about women in Sharia, but it speaks about what has happened in the United Kingdom. She has studied and investigated the Sharia councils, the cases that have come under it, and how all this came together. And she says that she believes that it was because Rowan Williams was sensitive to the fact and afraid that the Christianity would be subsumed by secularism. So he felt that if this was offered to other minority communities, they may somehow be able to save Christianity. So what I'm trying to say here is that Western governments and governance play a huge role in whether Muslims integrate or not. This offer of a second set of laws, of a second set of legal rules should not even be offered. One law for all, I believe there is a movement here in the United Kingdom, which I support because I am a secular Muslim. And so we need to follow one law. And how hard is it for the government to say this to minorities, to immigrants coming in, that we have just one law and this is what you should follow? I mean, all Western countries are struggling with this, but it has to come not just from the grassroots level. It has to also come from the top down. I'm not going to take up too much more of your time because you have a document on your tables about the reform movement and what my organization does, and we partner with anyone who follows the same mandate as we do. We believe the reform, the seeds have been sown, but it can only happen once we get the essential separation of religion and state. Thank you so much.